Hi everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Last meeting, as part of your asynchronous activity, um, I asked you to maximize the different learning resources, including our video lecture about art in emerging Europe, wherein we have discussed the different art movements that occurred during those eras and has a great influence and impact in contemporary and modern art and to our society as a whole. As Greece was starting to sort of dissembled from fall apart, that was also the time that artist and art itself become more emotional and realistic. We have mentioned also in our previous discussion that Greeks idealized the human form, and their idealized human form was mostly male, about 18 to 21 years old. And as they create different sculptures and artworks, their goal is to have a perfect human representation. They aim for perfection. So that was the Greeks. Okay? So sa mga artists and artworks from Rome naman, we can think more of the Colosseums. And although hindi natin maitatanggi na may pagkakaparehas ang styles and mediums na ginamit ng Romans sa mga Greeks, kasi as we have mentioned nga doon sa ating previous video lecture, art in Greece has a lot of influence, has a great influence and impacts of art history. However, Rome seek ways to find their way as well in creating their own style sa kanilang mga artworks. So for this week, we are going to discuss the last topic under Unit 2, Western Art History, which is modern and contemporary art. And for our learning objectives, um, by the end of this lesson, you should be able to first differentiate modern and contemporary art. Show the interrelation of modern and contemporary art. Isolate and discuss significant historical events that informed and inspired the different movements under contemporary art. And lastly, classify specific artworks into the different movements under contemporary art. The history of art is one of the most difficult tasks to pin down kasi there's a lot to remember aside from the boredom or the tiredness na na-experience na sa pagbabasa ng mahabang history about art. There's a lot to remember, right? The dates, the significant and prominent people, their influence, and their stories, most importantly. So, as what previous chapters have shown, significant ideas, canons, and tradition, preferences, and dominance of styles, media, and mode of production were the definitive characteristics that segment art history into identifiable periods and movements. Identifiable but not necessarily precise. It is important to note that the periods and movements of art are themselves testament to the connection of art and culture in the everyday life, in our everyday life, as it is examined and analyzed in context. It becomes increasingly apparent that art is not detached from, rather, it is embedded in the affairs of the society in which it exists. It offers a glimpse as to the beliefs of a specific eras, periods, and how these beliefs were translated into how people saw themselves and the world and how they chose to come into terms with it all in flux. So, this lesson attempts to provide a glimpse of contemporary art and how it was understood, defined, and represented not only within the bounds of the world but also beyond it. Okay? So, first, let us define and differentiate these two terms, modern and contemporary art. So, a lot of people think that modern art is contemporary. Kasi modern, contemporary are considered synonymous, right? Um, in some contexts, it's the same. It has the same meaning. This, however, is not the case when these terms are used in the context of art. Therein, they refer to two different consecutive periods qualified by different approaches to art making, and the art served. It's understandable since both modern and contemporary mean current, now, or the present. But in the art world, to be exact, the two are as different as apples and oranges. So to better make sense of contemporary art, perhaps it is best to be back to the predecessor modern art. So when we say modern art includes artistic work produced during the period extending roughly from 1860s to 1970s. Modern art is actually pretty old. Today, the artwork of modern art is not the same as it was in the past hundreds of years. Modern art, so actually, it's pretty old. It's roughly started nga during the Industrial Revolution around the 1860s. And modern art saw the digression of artists away from past conventions and traditions and toward freedom. There is the famous adage of anything goes from this period. So, before artists based their artworks on what they see in nature, they tend to make a copy or representation of their environment. But during this period, they explore and experiment on other styles and techniques, or abstraction to be exact. Or one example is abstraction during this period. They broaden their creativity, especially when photography arise. They didn't see the sense of making a copy of the environment or nature anymore, and they just do their thing freely. So, with the world becoming increasingly complex, it required an art that could accommodate such range and breadth. Roughly between the 1960s to late 1970s, creatives celebrated the novel opportunities in art, from the materials to its manipulation and ways of seeing and thinking about art. The devotion of artists to a strict narrative was often illustrated in their figurative works. However, these artists have their nod to abstraction. The tenets of this period were not only reflected in its art, but it was also evident in the way people lived and conducted themselves, the social issues that were relevant, fashion, music, and the wide range of images and activities they were engaged in. This period saw the heavy mass production of goods, along with encouraging environments made possible by industrialization, also new technology, urbanization, and rise of commercially driven culture. There was also um, a secularization of society, so interest in nature and primacy of the self and individuality. Artists were committed to developing language of their own original but representative. What this means is that artists drew the world but in his own terms. It was no wonder that within this period, modern period, um, it grew a vast number of different movements, many isms that we have discussed na on the previous lectures, like Impressionism, Symbolism, Cubism, what else? Expressionism, Fauvism, and even Futurism. And the art mediums during modern art period were drawing, painting, and also sculpture. Um, Now, let's also discuss contemporary art para mas ma-distinguish natin yung difference between these two periods. Okay? So, contemporary art, which is art made from the 1970s to the present. So, in order to move forward, it is necessary to underscore that this can be better understood after a starting point has been established. Compared to the dense taxonomy of modern art, contemporary art had fewer isms. Mas konti yung meaning, mas konti yung art movement during the contemporary art. So, under its wing. So, perhaps this was also due to the fact that it's still unfolding. Kasi, sabi nga natin, contemporary art, it compromises yung art made from 1970s until now, the present. So, it's still unfolding, it's still changing, it's still developing. Okay? So, as we have mentioned, contemporary art comprises artworks that was produced in 1970. So, effectively, this period can be traced from 1970s to the present. And there is a reason behind this cutoff. Bakit may ganitong cutoff? So, the cutoff was hinged on two terms. Kasi, during 1970s, the 1970s saw the emergence of postmodernism. The affix was a clue that whatever followed was segregated from its precursor. Second reason is that the 1970s saw the decline of the clearer identified artistic movements. So for these reasons, they had to put a cutoff to differentiate, to segregate these two eras and their different contributions. During contemporary art, um, happened the birth of new medium. So during contemporary art, may mga panibagong mediums na lumabas like performance art, video art, land art, installation art, and even virtual art. But most importantly, contemporary art focused more on the social issues rather than making new aesthetics or arts that is solely for pleasuring the eyes of its audiences. So, reaping the benefits and drawbacks of the dramatic changes that occurred at the beginning of the 20th century, the social, political, and cultural context continued to provoke the artists to create art na napapatungkol or ina-address yung mga social issues natin. Okay? Um, there is a potent source of reference for his work. Sabi art may be spoilt for choice. In a world where nothing is seasonal or original anymore, there is no home base for which to operate. And so the arts today can be seen as a responding to a number of issues, some of within their own structures of means and techniques, some more widely understood as issues within society, typically not as resolved. So there is a potent source of reference for his work so that he may continue so that the artist may continue to question the existing and emergent values of society. So this multiplicity of perspectives brought to light to a more difficult terrain to map out in terms of clear and distinct movements, because what compelled artist works were not prevailing medium, techniques, or style. Rather, it was the themes and concerns they address. And the conversation was no longer limited to geographic locales but became increasingly a global conversation. So during the contemporary art, art was heavily driven by ideas and theories and even the blurring of notions of what is and can be considered as art, with the involvement of television, photography, cinema, digital technology, performance or performance art, and even objects of the everyday. It was the idea that was more important than its virtual articulation. Okay? So, in the 1970s, marked the beginning of contemporary art, which extends through the present day. This period is dominated by various schools and smaller movements that emerge. Okay? And yeah, ito yung mga different art movements na napapaloob during the contemporary art. Ito yung mga art movements na nangyari during the contemporary art. So first on the list, we have there the postmodernism. So in reaction against modernism, artists created works that reflected skepticism, irony, and philosophical critics. So this series of silkscreen, alam ko familiar kayo sa image na yan, kung sino yan. So this series of silkscreen prints of Marilyn Monroe, that is right, is an example of postmodernism art. It was taken from her image in the film Niagara. I haven't watched that film pa, but the artists were produced first in color and then in black and white. They were made in the months after the death of Marilyn Monroe in 1962 by Warhol, who was fascinated by both the cult of celebrity and by death itself. This series fused the artist interest. The color contrasted against the monochrome that fades out the right is suggestive of life and death, according to the artist, while the repetition of images echoes Marilyn's ubiquitous presence in the media. So this work can be conceived as postmodern in many senses. Firstly, because its overt reference to popular culture and low art challenges the purity of modernist aesthetic. Its repetitive element is an homage to mass production, and its ironic play on the concept of authenticity undermines the authority of the artist. The use of the format, which was common in Christian altarpieces in Renaissance period, draws attention to the American worship of both celebrities and images. All of this translates into an artwork that challenges traditional demarcations between high and low art and makes a statement about the importance of consumerism and spectacle in the 1960s. Okay, so image on your right, ano po, is an example of feminist art. So feminist art, this movement arose in an attempt to transform stereotypes and breaks the model of a male-dominated art history. So the dinner party, yung image on your right sa screen nyo, the dinner party is probably one of the most well-known feminist artworks in the world, and it's still relevant and popular to this day, even though it was created in the 70s. So it's a mixed media installation that consists of a triangle-made big tables set for a buffet. And the tables are set for 39 famous women, real women and fictional or mythical, each celebrating their achievements. So in each plate, there's a sculpture rising from it that looks like something in between a flower and a butterfly, each different and unique. So dito makikita natin na during the contemporary period, yung mga isms natin or yung mga art movements natin ay may mga pinaglalaban. At dito nga sa feminist art, gusto nilang i-promote yung mga achievement ng mga kababaihan to also to affirm din yung mga kababaihan sa kani-kanilang mga profession at kani-kanilang mga achievements. Okay, so moving on to the next movement, we have their neo-expressionism and street art. So ano nga ba itong neo-expressionism? By the way, the 1970s mark the beginning of contemporary art. Ano po, again, which extends through the present day. Okay, so this period again is dominated by various schools and smaller movements that emerge. So another movement po during or under the contemporary period is the neo-expressionism. Ano nga ba ito? Artists sought to revive original aspect of expressionism and create highly textural, expressive, large works. So this artwork na nakikita nyo sa inyong screen is by Jean-Michel Basquiat. I don't know how to pronounce really his surname, but his first name is Jean-Michel. He is one of the leading figures of neo-expressionism movement. As you can see, the neo-expressionist artists depicted their subject in an almost raw and British manner. Kung makikita nyo dyan. So, what you see is what you get, dito sa mga images na to. Newly resurrecting in their frequently large-scale work, the highly textural and expressive brushwork and intense color that had been rejected by the immediately preceding art movements. According to the creator of this artwork, he wanted to make paintings that look as if they were made by a child. So, very raw ang mga art na pinoproduce under Neo-Expressionism movement. Okay? So, next is the street art. So, dito naman, artists such as Keith Haring, also Jean-Michel Basquiat, Barry McGee, Banksy, and more created graffiti-like art on surfaces in public places like sidewalks, buildings, and overpass. So, don't get me wrong. So, itong street art makikita natin usually talaga literally sa street. But, guys, wag naman nating ugaliin gumawa ng mga graffiti, especially sa mga private buildings or private property or even sa government na mga property without having permission doon sa mga may sarili ng mga property na yon, because hindi naman lahat mako-consider natin as na graffiti ay art na agad. There are a lot of youngsters nowadays na makabili lang ng spray paint kung ano-ano nang isusulat sa mga walls ng mga private property or sa mga public places. That is not right kasi syempre pinaghihirapan naman ng mga taong yun yung pagpapapintura at pagpapaayos ng mga bahay nila, tapos i-sprayan lang natin ng ng spray paint, tapos sasabihin natin ng art yan. Bakit? Sa'yo ba yung place na yon? May permission ka ba to do that? 'Di ba? Wala naman. But yeah, this is street art. So basically makikita natin siya sa mga street or sa mga public places. But itong mga artist na gumagawa ng street art, of course, humihingi sila ng permiso. Like, for example, ngayon, 'di ba? There are a lot of murals na makikita natin ng mga presidentiables or kung sino man na mga nag-run ngayon na mga politicians para mahikayat din yung mga tao. So, the goal of this ng mga artist natin para mahikayat din yung mga tao na bumoto doon sa mga ini-endorse nilang mga artist or artist or politician, endorse nilang politician para mahikayat yung mga tao na iboto din sa yung mga politicians na yun na pinaniniwalaan nila na magli-lead ng maayos sa ating bansa. But anyways, going back to the topic, street art can often be viewed as a tool for promoting an artist's personal agenda surrounding contemporary social concerns, with city facades acting in the same role as the old-fashioned soapbox. A place to extol the artist's opinion on a myriad issues ranging from politics and environmentalism to consumerism and consumption. So many street artists use the public canvas of buildings, bridges, lampposts, underpasses, ditches, sidewalks, also walls and benches to assure their individual messages are seen by a wide swath of the population, unfiltered by target demographics or being accessible only to art world as citizens. Okay, so that is street art. Next is the pictures generation. Okay. So artists Cindy Sherman, Louis Lawler, Gary Simmons, and others who were influenced by conceptual and pop art experimented with recognizable imagery to explore images shape our perceptions of the world. So the pictures generation was a loose affiliation of artists influenced by conceptual and pop art who utilize appropriation and montage to reveal the constructed nature of images. So experimenting with a variety of media, including photography and film, their works expose cultural tropes and stereotypes in popular imagery by reworking well-known images. Their art challenged notions of individuality and authorship, making the movement an important part of postmodernism. The artist created a more savvy and critical viewing culture while also expanding notions of art to include social criticisms for a new generation of viewers saturated by mass media. Okay? So next movement naman is appropriation art. Okay? So this movement focus on the use of images in art with a little transformation from original form. So kung makikita nyo dito sa example natin na image or artwork dito sa appropriation art, konti lang yung ginawang parang transformation from the original art form or original form. Appropriation art or the art of appropriation is the use of pre-existing objects or images with little or no transformation applied to the term applied to them. So the use of appropriation has played a significant role in art throughout the 20th century and has continued as valid art form to the present. So in visual arts, the to appropriate means to properly adopt, borrow, recycle, or sample aspects or the entire form of appropriation is the concept that the new work recontextualizes. So whatever it borrows to create the new work. So ayun yun, yan ang appropriation art. So in the past decade, there has been a considerable rise in court cases citing plagiarism. So here is the art list uh, uh, sa ating reading materials, ibibigay ko sa inyo yung art list top 10 most controversial works of appropriation art and some of the court cases that followed. Kasi nga, dito sa appropriation art, basically, gumagaya ka from original form. So, there has been some cases ng plagiarism while doing appropriation art. Okay? So, the last movement under contemporary period is the digital art. So, I know that you are mas familiar kayo dito sa digital art kasi yung generation nyo, di ba, mostly nang nakikita natin sa mga social media natin is an example of digital art. So, digital art is the advent of the camera lent way to this artistic practice that followed or allowed artists to use the infusion of art and technology to create with mediums like computers, audio, and visual software, sound, and also pixels. The digital artist also works with pixels. So the first use of the term digital art was in the early 1980s when computer engineers devised a paint program which was used by the pioneering digital artist Harold Cohen. So, this became known as Aaron, a robotic machine designed to make large drawings on sheets of paper placed on the floor. Since this early foray into artificial intelligence, Cohen continued to fine-tune the Aaron program as technology becomes more sophisticated. Digital art can be computer-generated, scanned, or drawn using a tablet and a mouse. So again, that is digital art. So the last movement under contemporary period. So that ends our lesson in Unit 2, Western Art History, the Modern and Contemporary Art. So I hope that you have gained something from this lecture. And if you have questions, you know the drill. You can find me at CM Cuarto. You can email me at cmcuarto@cspc.edu.ph, or you can message me via Messenger or by our group chat at Kath Cuarto. So that's all. Goodbye and take care, everyone.